Welcome to the Take Me to Europe podcast with your host, cultural anthropologist Monique Skidmore.
If you thought the Parthenon was old, wait until you hear about the Minoan civilization of Crete. The magnificent Palace of Knossos is over 1,000 years older. We're going to travel to Crete today and get up close and personal with a host of mythological figures, a bull and a Minotaur. Our guide to mythology and ancient architecture of Crete and of the Palace of Knossos is the head of the Tour Guides Association of Crete, Manolis Papadakis. Crete is the largest of the Greek islands, and it is an ancient centre of power that still influences the mainland. Crete didn't become a part of Greece until 1913, but there was a settlement on the site of the current Palace of Knossos as far back as the 6th millennium BCE. But as Manolis told me with a wry grin, if we were to dig down to excavate its secrets, we'd destroy the palace above. Crete was the centre of the great civilization of the Minoans. The Minoan civilization rose on this island 4,000 years ago and was abandoned by 1,100 CE, most likely when the Mycenaeans invaded Crete. The ruins of the Palace of Knossos can be found in Heraklion. It's been called Europe's oldest city. The palace building alone covers over 3 acres. This was the cultural and political heart of the Minoan civilization, and at its height it had 18,000 residents. But by 1700 BCE, the population around the palace grew to 100,000. The palace had a ritual cult centre on the ground floor, and below the palace seems to be the most likely location of Daedalus's labyrinth that imprisoned the Minotaur. And now a quick word on a favourite subject of mine, the labyrinth. The labyrinth of Crete was a difficult and confusing path underground that Daedalus built at Knossos to contain the monster, the Minotaur. This mythological story has found its way onto Cretan coins, where from 400 BCE, a particular kind of labyrinth, it's called a single-path, 7-course classical labyrinth, and that's what's depicted on these coins. There are 2 general kinds of labyrinths: the single-path labyrinth, where there's just one way to eventually get to the centre, and the branching labyrinth. The single labyrinth is the design of most mazes above the ground, but it's also used as a meditation when it's drawn on the ground. So Daedalus and his labyrinth, the Minotaur, Theseus, King Minos, Ariadne, the world of Cretan mythology is rich and dense. Let's go and find our local guide, Manolis Papadakis, and sort out all this mythology at the Palace of Knossos. Manolis, welcome to Trip Anthropologist.
Hello, Monique. Nice being with you.
Manolis, you're a native of Crete. What draws you to its ancient sites?
Essentially, we have to take things from the beginning. And, well, this is actually perhaps the most well-known ancient Greek legends. And as it usually goes, it starts with Zeus, Jupiter, most well-known ancient Greek god, the father of God and mortals, who at some time fell in love with Europe, the beautiful princess of Phoenicia. Phoenicia actually was not very far from Crete. Crete is very close to not only Egypt, but also the eastern basin of the Mediterranean Sea. And in so many words, what Zeus did was, in an attempt to seduce Europe to transform himself into a beautiful white bull, he was successful in abducting Europe. He actually brought him all the way to Crete, and it was here that they kind of spent a certain night together, to put it this way, at the shade of an evergreen plane tree that one can still find in the fertile plain of Messara, or on the island of Crete. So shortly after that, Jupiter kind of abandoned Europe, who remained here in Crete, and she became the wife of the first king of the island, his name being Asterios. Now, she eventually gave birth to the 3 legendary kings of Crete. So Minos, who gave his name to the Minoan civilization, Rhadamanthys in Greek, and Sarpedon. Now, Rhadamanthys reigned over the Palace of Knossos, whereas Sarpedon in the 3rd Minoan palace, situated not that far away from Knossos. Now, sometime Minos, in an attempt to prove to everyone that it was actually he who became the, let's say, ruler of the whole of Crete, he turned to the gods and he asked for a sign, and Poseidon, or Neptune, it's always the same divinity, decided to help him by sending him a beautiful white bull as a sign that, well, this is actually the guy we want. So Minos, unfortunately for him, what he did was to not sacrifice the animal. It was an offering of the gods, so he had to, let's say, somewhere return it to them. He kept the bull in his flocks, which did not exactly please the Greek god Theseus, who decided to punish King Minos. And so what Poseidon did was to turn to Aphrodite, or Venus, the Greek goddess of beauty, who, well, kind of made sure that Pasiphae, the wife, the queen of Crete, King Minos' wife, fell in love with a bull, with a white bull. That's Greek mythology for you. So that's where Daedalus comes in. Daedalus, what he does is actually to create a statue made out of wood and bronze. The queen kind of hid into the statue and eventually gave birth to the well-known Minotaur, the most well-known monster of Greek mythology, this huge man, this giant who had the body of a man, obviously, and the head of a bull, and who was promptly imprisoned into the labyrinth.
Okay, that gets us through a lot of ancient mythology very quickly. Thank you. So right now, we've got a palace. We've got a labyrinth created by Daedalus around it. We've got a Minotaur trapped within it. And we've got King Minos, is that right, presiding over the top of it. Now, what happens to the Minotaur? And how does the rest of that story keep moving on?
At approximately the same time, obviously, the Minotaur is imprisoned in the labyrinth, which is actually the Palace of Knossos. So at approximately the same time, the Athenians, they kind of assassinated King Minos' oldest son, Androgeos. And so King Minos, not at all happy, as you can very well understand, he organized an expedition against Athens, which he invaded and occupied. And it was actually there that he forced the Athenians, sent him these rather famous 14 young men. It's a very famous part of the legend. These 14 young men and women who would from time to time come to Crete, end up in the labyrinth, and obviously eventually be devoured by the Minotaur. So the Athenians kept on sending these young men and women to their death until the appearance of Theseus. Now Theseus, who is definitely one of the most well-known ancient Greek heroes, along with Hercules, an Athenian hero, who came to Crete in an attempt to put an end to all of this. Well, here he kind of met Ariadne, who was the youngest and the most beautiful of King Minos' daughters. So what she did was to she actually fell in love with him and decided to help him. So she also turned to Daedalus, the same way her mother, Pasiphae, had done before her, because obviously Daedalus decided to construct the statue after Pasiphae, the queen of Crete, asked him to. So this time, after the demand of Ariadne, Daedalus did give her, amongst other things, the so-called Ariadne's clue, a ball of string that our hero Theseus used to enter the labyrinth and leave it without any serious problems. So what he actually did was to take this ball of string. He quite simply tied one end of the string at the entrance. He made his way into the labyrinth, slowly unrolling the ball of string. Eventually he came across the Minotaur, but he obviously killed. He afterwards made his way by following the string. He saved the other Athenians. He sabotaged the ships of the locals. He abducted Ariadne and Phaedra, her oldest daughter, and he began his trip back to Athens.
It's, I think, one of my favorite mythological stories. And as you mentioned, it is one of the most well-known. It's got everything that a true epic needs to have, doesn't it? Heroes, heroines, monsters, so much at stake, and then the help of the gods. And that trickster Daedalus, who is such a great character in Greek mythology. And so that brings an awful lot of weight then onto the history of the Palace of Knossos, this vast complex in Heraklion. So coming out of that mythology, there's a whole bunch of symbols, of course, Mother Earth or nature, snakes, axes, labyrinth, the bull. So when you take people to the Palace of Knossos, and for our travellers, what should they want to see?
If someone has the possibility, the opportunity to visit the Palace of Knossos, if they can, they should definitely visit the Archaeological Museum of Heraklion, because this will give them a better understanding. In the Knossos, they see the complex as it was, obviously, and in the Museum of Heraklion, they can quite simply see an impressive number of objects found in situ, in the site of Knossos.
Eventually,
Exactly.
of course, even the mighty great European Minoan civilization fell. When and how did this civilization decline?
Now, the conventional end of the Minoan civilization is more or less at the end of the second millennium BCE. So let's say 1100 BCE, which is approximately, let's round things up, some 3,000 years ago. The Palace of Knossos appears to have been destroyed at approximately, or abandoned even better, a couple of centuries before that. Well, obviously the Minoans did not exactly disappear. They did not one day quite simply disappear into thin air. But there was not only one reason for the decline and fall of the Minoan civilization. So many associate the decline and fall, for example, to the arrival of the Mycenaeans, another well-known Greek tribe that came from continental Greece, Mycenae, the house of Atreides, obviously, where the tomb of Agamemnon can be found today. So the arrival of newcomers, natural disasters, and so on, they slowly pushed the Minoans to the eastern part of the island, which is the most barren and arid part of Crete. And they were slowly, let's say, replaced. Their palaces occupied, their cities rebuilt, and so on. But nonetheless, did not exactly disappear. They kept on living, and they eventually became one with the newcomers. Or perhaps it would be best to say that the newcomers eventually became one with the already existing Minoan.
That has been fascinating, Manolis. And today we've learned about one of those great historical civilizations in the ancient world and its monumental palace complex at Knossos. We've thrilled to the exciting mythology of ancient Greece, and we've learned about the symbols, architecture, and the eventual demise of the great Minoan civilization. Well, I'd really like to thank Manolis Papadakis for being our guide to this fascinating civilization and to the great ruins of Knossos.
Thank you, Monique, for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Take Me to Europe podcast. Hop onto our website, takemetoeuropetours.com, and sign up to our newsletter to learn more about Europe's hidden and most exciting destinations. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast series.